Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Sabina McKenna, and I'm thrilled to be here for this wonderful talk about size, price, and sustainability in fashion. I wanted to start by acknowledging that the event is taking place on the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and to recognise them as the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to their elders past and present and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This event is also part of the PayPal Melbourne Fashion Festival Independent Program. Once again, I'm Sabina. I am a writer and a curator, and I have a project called Where Are You From, which is all about cultural identity in Australia and abroad. I've also worked in fashion in various capacities as a model and sometimes model advocate. And I have three incredible speakers joining us today. First of all, Emma Zhou. Emma is a writer, editor, and podcaster who loves fashion, who covers fashion, culture, and creativity. She has a podcast called Smart Casual and worked as the editor of Frankie magazine from 2021 to 2023. Next, we have Maggie Zhou, who is a wonderful writer, editor, and content creator, and the co-host of the Culture Club podcast. She's written for publications including The Guardian, ABC, The Age, Harper's Bazaar, and Cosmopolitan, and has previously worked at Refinery 29 and Fashion Journal. And also joining us, we have Sam. Sam van Zweden is a non-fiction writer and fat liberation activist concerned with mental health, memory, food, and the body. And she's the author of an award-winning book titled Eating with My Mouth Open, and the organiser of A+ Market, which is a plus-size fashion event that dreams of a future where hot, ethical, and fierce clothes are made for everyone. Please make them feel welcome. So, panellists, I'd love to start by asking about how your work in fashion began, covering fashion, and also if there was like a pivotal moment or experience that kind of empowered you to start raising awareness about some of the issues we're about to talk about.
Yeah, so for me, I came into my interest in fashion as a teenager. I started blogging, I was on Tumblr, I discovered the world of Instagram as it launched, and from there I started posting my own outfits, becoming interested in fashion. Through that time, I was being gifted fast fashion pieces, and that was very new, very exciting for a while. At the same time, around uni days, I was doing some learnings and projects about fast fashion. And the thing is, I was learning about the terrible impacts of fast fashion, but then not realising my habits were perhaps kind of contributing to that. So after a while, I wanted to examine that cognitive dissonance where my values and my actions weren't really in alignment. And when I struggled to unravel those uncomfortable feelings, that's where I kind of came to where I am today as someone who really advocates for slow fashion, slow ethical and sustainable fashion as an alternative to fast fashion.
Amazing. Emma, did you want to go next?
Yeah. So like you, Maggie, I was obsessed with fashion when I was young, a teenager, came through it, all the traditional ways, like through fashion magazines, and was also a teenage blogger, which was very fun. And when I was older, started writing for Broadsheet and covering design and local independent fashion designers. And I would say that's when I started thinking much more critically about fashion, because I was able to have these conversations directly with designers and learn about local production. And I learned about outworkers or home workers, as they're also known. So just in case you don't know, home workers or outworkers are people, they are makers who sew your clothes, but from their home instead of from the factory. And historically, these workers are kind of hidden away in the shadows and were easily exploited. So I learned a lot about that, and I ended up writing a book, doing some research, a very small book, interviewing a lot of outworkers themselves. And through all of that research, I just kind of discovered that fashion production is an immigrant story, or like has been for the last 100 years. That really, piqued my interest.
I did have a look at that. Sam?
I guess I'm a bit of a comparative late bloomer. I for the longest time, fashion was not fun for me. Shopping as a plus size person, not fun. Usually involves going into a store and hoping that they have your size. If they do have your size, they'll point you somewhere near the back to a separate rack where the garments usually don't look like the other garments in the shop. And there's a lot of sort of shame and discomfort that comes from fashion shopping as a plus size person. So for me, I guess I had kind of a come to Jesus moment when I attended my first A+, and realised that I could be buying clothing from people who looked like me and people who weren't just buying things because they fit, but were buying things because they felt that they expressed who they were, or because they brought them joy, or they felt fierce in it. And that was sort of a different possibility for fashion for me. But then I guess after a while I also realised that while I can't walk into a room and start a conversation about like, hey, so have you heard about medicalised weight stigma? Let's chat about that. It is much easier to walk into a room of uninitiated people and be like, hey, isn't it a bit fucked that I can not shop off the rack and you can? So it's, I guess, coming at it from a social justice point of view.
Good community to, help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we're at a really interesting time in fashion in terms of making a lot of good big strides toward more inclusivity and representation in a lot of areas. But at the same time, it feels like there's negative stories popping up all the time, from the recent model boycotts to currently the rolling back of equity, diversity and inclusion initiatives. So maybe this progress has been a bit surface level. I wanted to ask what you think some of the barriers are that are preventing us from making systemic change as opposed to superficial change. Anyone can start.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Just the part about your question about whether it's surface level or not, I think for a long time it very much was tokenistic in fashion. Like I remember throughout the 2000s, you know, like plus size models were a trend for a hot second, disappeared. Asian models were a trend for a second, but then you could never have an Asian model and a black model on the runway together. It was like too much diversity to handle. And, you know, I feel like in the last 5 years that's actually changed so dramatically. I just remember back to looking through style.com images when I was 15 and it was all skinny white Russian models. And the runways of the last 5 years, you look through them and it is probably the most diverse you've ever seen a high fashion runway be. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying there's still, you know, so much work to be done in terms of representation, but it really has come a long way. And I think the powerful thing is that at the consumer level, we feel really empowered to ask for better. Like consumers will get on social media and will ask brands, you know, why don't you have that in an extended size range? Or why are your campaigns lacking diversity? And while I do think that this kind of the witch hunt against DEI in America is, you know, freaking us all out as it should, I don't know how that conversation is going to translate to Australia. I think it'll be really interesting to watch brands who have championed diversity in the last 5 years. It'll be interesting to see if they continue to do so moving forward. But I do think we've just reached that level in consumer awareness where we feel like we don't want to settle for less.
It's harder to get past people.
Yeah.
Yeah, this might be a bit cynical, but I do think that fashion and media has such a short attention span sometimes, and they can fixate on one like great representation thing for a short amount of time before they move on. And I think we've been seeing this over and over and again. For me, the crux of the problem maybe goes back to who's working behind the scenes. It's not just about who's visible, but who's actually making these decisions in publications, behind brands, fashion weeks, etc. And that's what I'd love to see more of. I think Australia, we're so lucky. We have such a talented pool of people, and the reality is that in fashion and media, like it's still very much predominantly straight size and white, and that definitely reflects on what we then prioritise on screens, on stages, and what we think about fashion.
Yeah, 100%. I think in terms of it perhaps being a bit surface level, I mean, we had that Victoria's Secret runway that was inclusive and went up to a size 14, and they all patted themselves on the back and like, how great to see bigger bodies. And we did have like a beautiful glittering moment where bigger bodies became visible and it all felt very hopeful. It does feel like that's being rolled back a bit now. And there's this weird sort of, I think, tick box mentality for especially brands that you'll find in a shopping centre or whatever that are like, yeah, okay, we did an extended size range, we've done that. But the reality of those extended size ranges is that you either need to go in and ask for them, they're not being stocked in store. Like there's a bunch of stores that extended their size ranges and only do like sizes 22 plus online, so you still can't shop in the store. Or they don't market it sufficiently so that when you're shopping for those pieces, you're not seeing it on plus size models. And if I can't see the garment on a body like mine, then I'm going to assume that either it doesn't exist for me or it exists for me, but the pattern hasn't been graded in a way that is going to suit my body type. So I just don't bother. And then they wonder why people aren't buying it.
Yeah, they mustn't have like proper fit models or testing. Yep. And one of the critiques of the Victoria's Secret runway was that a lot of the plus size looks they modelled actually weren't available in the sizes that were worn by the models. So
yeah, that is so often the case, especially with runway fashion as well. But I think you mentioned before the model boycott that happened as well with Australian Fashion Week. I think 100% that speaks to the fact that behind the scenes it probably isn't a diverse team, but it's also this complete lack of education. So I think in that case with the boycott, the models were saying that they were black models and people backstage didn't know how to do their hair. They were having to run around and do their own hair for the show, which is just crazy. And I think, that speaks to a complete lack of education in the training system. I think that also speaks to perhaps racism in hair and makeup itself, where, certain features are prized and black hair is not considered beautiful, is considered too difficult to deal with. There are so many stories of people, learning to doing their certificate of hairdressing and just saying, I don't know how to deal with different hair textures. I'm not equipped.
They actually don't teach it. Like, I think now there are some programs that do, but it's so common. I think the size thing as well particularly is having a moment, I think, because this whole like emphasis on being thin is kind of reared its head again. Do you think that that's having, like, how do you see that impacting the body positive movement in general and like what you've seen lately on runways and stuff?
I mean, I think a lot of people would agree that we don't typically see ourselves reflected in fashion media historically, right? I think when we're going through fashion magazines, you're not like, yeah, I feel so seen and accepted, like this is me. And I think it has gone worse in recent years. In some ways, it's a hard one, right? I think sometimes we make great strides, but in other ways we pull back. For me, I think what's worrying is the real world consequences, kind of what you were saying, Sam, of like what's actually happening in our fast fashion stores or high street stores. We saw Witchery do a rebrand, I think it was last year, and they removed size 20. Glassons recently launched an activewear collection, and their marketing technique was to put hired models on treadmills outside their Bondi store. And even kind of recently, Connon quietly pulled their plus size section from their website. Like it's not its own separate kind of easy to find section anymore. So whatever's happening in this big glossy fashion world like affects all of us and how we shop.
Sam, I wanted to ask about A+, because obviously that's where you showcase a lot of these brands and it was an answer to that lack. As that's grown and evolved in the last 5 years you've had it, how have you noticed people's attitudes toward plus size fashion and like the awareness around it change?
I think there's a lot more opportunity, like there's a lot more available. I think in Australia especially, like Australia is so behind in size diversity and catering for plus size bodies. So a lot of the good stuff has been coming in from the UK or the US for a while, and that's starting to trickle down to pre-loved markets like A+. I do think that there's a lot more available than there previously has been, and it's always been really important to A+ to maintain like new brands coming through and showcasing who's doing stuff really well, instead of I guess, punishing people who aren't doing it so well, just making a really big deal of the people that are doing it well, because it feels good.
On that note of what's not going well, though, where do you think overall there needs more improvement?
Cannot for the life of me find mask clothing in plus sizes. Really hard. There's like a couple of fast fashion brands and that's sort of it. It's really, really hard, and it's just, it doesn't, I don't know, just doesn't seem to be around as much as femme stuff, and especially like ultra femme stuff. So even stuff that's gender neutral is kind of harder to find.
Yeah. Side note.
Sorry, I just have a question for Sam, actually. Because you said before that a lot of the time the bigger sizes are just not available in store. I'm just wondering whether you know why it is that retailers refuse to put the bigger sizes in store and just relegate it to the online shopping experience.
My wild guess would be fat phobia. They just don't want to be seen to be dressing larger bodies, because I think fashion is aspirational. That's, you know, in all sorts of ways. And if the aspiration is to have the body ideal, that's never been a larger body. So while they want our money, they don't want to actually be associated with the people that are wearing the clothes in bigger sizes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about sustainability and shift gears a little bit. Obviously, there's a connection between like the societal obsession with body image and size and consumerism. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that one is directly driving the other?
This is such a big question. I in my notes I wrote like capitalism. Under capitalism, where we're all consumers and fixated on optimizing ourselves, because I think it's a bit of a power thing as well, in the sense of like we feel powerless to address a lot of bigger issues in the world, socially, politically, economically, and we've somehow been convinced to turn that kind of anger inwards towards ourselves, into fixing ourselves, into controlling, I suppose, our bodies. Wild theory of mine, I guess. But yeah, and I also think that we like form our identities through what we buy a lot of the time. And I just wonder if we can divest from that a little bit to, you know, like not think that if we just buy the right things, we'll be better people, or, you know, we all have raging shopping addictions thanks to online shopping, and we buy when we're bored, we buy when we're insecure. All of these things feed into negative body image as well.
Emotional consumption.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, Emma. I agree. I think fast fashion at its core for me is about a lack. I think it wants to keep you in a cycle of not feeling good enough. You don't have the newest something. You need to be part of every new trend that keeps emerging. And that, I think, is so tied into body image, right? It's that feeling of not being worthy without something. And I think they both feed each other and they both coexist. And I think that's very intentional. At the end of the day, fashion as an industry, it's there to make money. And like, of course, that's how they're going to keep you wanting to stay in that loop, because you'll always want to keep buying to contribute to that feeling. And I think it can be quite never-ending unless you find a way to kind of hop off that Ferris wheel, I guess. But it's a hard one, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of us are also here in this room because we love fashion, right? We love expressing ourselves through style. There's so many incredible outfits in the crowd, a lot of colour as well that I can see. So it's like, can we find that happy medium between the industry and what we love about fashion? And I think yes, as well.
I don't know that I've actually got much to answer, like, in addition to that. I think it's definitely, it's absolutely tied. There's nothing that will keep you buying more than feeling dissatisfied with who you are and believing that there's a product out there that will fix it.
But also the fact that clothing is such bad quality these days that it's planned obsolescence. They want you to come back. They want the things to break, so you buy more. And so how do we step off that treadmill? It's like, you know, I'm sure we will talk about fast fashion in a second.
I love it. I'm like, this leads perfectly into my next question. Maggie, in that treadmill video, you called fast fashion clothes plastic clothes sold via aspiration. And that really stood out to me, because the biggest argument, I think, in defence of fast fashion going around is that they're more accessible in terms of price. Do you actually think that's true in the long term?
This is a big topic. I've spent maybe just over the last half a decade working in fashion, and this is probably one of the topics that gets people the most fired up, and for good reason. I get it. Fashion is so personal. We all clothe ourselves, right? And to preface, I really want to start that it is like unattainable, I think, to expect people to be buying from sustainable, ethical places. Like that's, of course, we are in a cost of living crisis. You don't need me to tell you that. I want to also say, though, that the way that we use clothes nowadays, I think, has drastically changed. Australians are the biggest consumers of textiles and clothing in the world. So on average, each of us are buying 56 new items a year, right? I think there is a big difference between shopping at fast fashion brands for basics and essentials and a few trendy pieces and the way that we are actually consuming fashion right now. I think it's easy to hide behind that. I'm not going to call it an excuse because it's true. It's hard to hide around that gesture of, fast fashion is way more affordable, which is true. But I think we have to also look at the way we're consuming, because I think back in the day we treated clothes with more value and respect, and they were things to invest in. Whereas now I think they're treated as things that are throwaway, things that we are entitled to. So it's that push and pull. I don't want to blame consumers because that's not it. But I also think at least for myself, I always try to still give myself some of that responsibility and question myself, even though it's a really difficult conversation, hey?
I think the fast fashion conversation in plus-size spaces isn't necessarily a little bit different. So if you think of, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, if you think of it like a bit of a hierarchy of needs, and at the bottom we've got does it exist at all? And we're moving up to things like, does it exist in my size? Can I afford it? Do I feel good in it? And then right at the top, we've got things about is it responsibly produced? Is it on trend? Where plus size audiences are often stuck at those bottom, does it exist? Is it affordable? Does it exist in my size?
Yep.
Do I feel good in it is even a bit of a luxurious question to be asking, that you don't even make it further up than that.
So it's about priorities and what you have access to.
Yeah.
But with those problems in mind, is there a way that we can make fashion both accessible and ethical at the same time? Or is it just that's a viable option for some people and we just have to accept that?
Well, I think it's about recognising that we're all engaging in sustainability at different levels, that we can't all buy the most expensive, most ethically produced things all the time, but we can buy secondhand, and we can, I think there's a really great sort of trickle-down effect in pre-loved markets where people are buying into brands that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford.
Yes.
And realising that they feel different and that they last differently and that you wear them differently. And then you start thinking about okay, so if I think about this in terms of cost per wear, where I could have 10 pieces or I could have one piece for the same price, but I'm getting a lot more wear out of this and it makes me feel better, then the decisions start to shift. So I think there's sort of an education opportunity there.
Yeah, and to add to that as well, I think with sustainability, I always want to shift it from something that's focused on buying and something that's more about mindfulness and how you approach clothing every day, because there are so many ways to be more sustainable without spending a cent, right? It's about shopping from your own wardrobe, re-wearing your clothes. It's even re-evaluating the purchase you are making. So if someone does buy from Shein, but they buy every week, maybe that's cutting back to every fortnight or every 3 weeks, right? I do think little steps do make a difference. I also do recall a Vivienne Westwood quote, which is, buy less, choose well, make it last. And what I love about that is that's not brand specific at all, right? That applies to anyone, I think.
And I think consumers are up against so much now in terms of marketing. This is probably the most marketing we've ever had enter our brains every day when we log online. And, the marketing obviously is working when you look at the profits from these big fast fashion companies. They're able to convince you that every event requires you to buy something. It's not just back in the day, okay, I got a new job, I have to get some corporate gear. Now it's what are you wearing for Euro Summer? What are you wearing for insert micro event, Charlie XCX's concert, And I'm just thinking about being a young person now and growing up in that world where that is the norm. It's actually really difficult to step away from that. I definitely think it's possible, but yeah, that's just what we're up against. And I wonder whether you guys think we can have somewhat, mindfully produced mass fashion that is affordable. Because I think a lot of the problem we have right now is the fastness of everything, right? We can have stuff that's made en masse and therefore it becomes a little bit affordable for people to purchase, but we should really not be stuck in this cycle where there's 60 new styles arriving each week. Like, no human needs that.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to even recognise that there is another option, that like if we just sort of slowed it all down a little bit. I think kids, I'm an old person, kids expect new stuff all the time.
That's it,
And
yeah.
that's a normal pace of buying things, that to even suggest that maybe we could do it differently feels quite radical.
Yeah, the fact that Shein it doesn't ship anything via boat. It's like sending a plane to you every time you order a package from Shein. They throw that package on a plane and it gets to you like a day or two later. I'm like, that's actually too fast. That's abnormal. We shouldn't accept that.
Yeah, the footprint is like always lost on us. I think that convenience culture and like the distraction and the convenience of pressing a button and something arriving. But if you actually, even like takeaway food, I feel like I think about that all the time. It's such a like huge footprint. But it's interesting to talk about the secondhand market because, of course, it's a really big solution to a lot of the problems that we're talking about. But the biggest consumers of that industry are Gen Z, who make up 40% of the consumers. They're also the biggest consumers of Shein and Temu and fast fashion generally. Where do you think the onus should fall in terms of educating people and giving them the tools to change that intention behaviour gap that's happening? Maggie. Oh, Emma, either.
Oh, no, I mean, I was just going to say, it's got to come from everywhere. It's got to be a mixture of government regulation. It's got to be peer pressure, not saying we bully each other into not buying fast fashion, but we could. And it's got to come from education. It's also got to come from industry, but industry is really bad at self-regulating, so that's where government comes in. Maggie?
Yeah, and to your point about young people and like how do we get them on board, I actually think a lot of people nowadays do know. Like there's so much information about the impacts of fast fashion out there that I think it's less of an education point but a caring point. Like, why should people care? At least for me, the way I got interested was, of course, about the environment, but a lot about workers' rights and looking at how, 80% of garment workers around the world are women. Under 2% of garment workers in the world get paid a living wage. And for me, it's like, oh, why am I prioritising my own desire to look cool and fashionable over these people's like livelihoods and like, what's it called? Like, sorry, worker conditions, that's right. So not just pay, but looking at like workplaces and such. So that's a really hard question because, yeah, I know you mentioned bullying half-heartedly, but fear-mongering is a really like, I think people get really, they really don't respond well to it, in my opinion. I get a lot of people who, I guess I totally understand why, but who don't respond well to that. So where do we find that happy medium of being educated and caring about it? If anyone's got any other tips, like I'm figuring that out.
It's just so easy to put it out of mind because you're not thinking about that when you see the $5 shirt online. You're thinking, I'm going to look great at this party. It's easy to put that image of the exploited worker out of your mind. It's easy to be like, oh, climate crisis, that's not coming yet.
As an individual as well, I think like you're one person in the moment rather than the whole world doing these things. You don't really put yourself into that state of mind.
Yeah.
Sam, do you have anything to
I think it's really easy to stack on people that are making fast fashion choices, and it's pretty yuck. Maggie, I think you've got a good point in that like shame is never a good driver for behaviour change, and we know that from like multiple realms. I think what we need is some excitement about the values that brands that are doing it right are espousing, and some really good storytelling to get people engaged in like why does the quality of this matter? Why do the working conditions matter? Why does where it came from matter? I know personally I now have a more personal relationship with the people that are making my clothes than I ever have before because of the market and because they're like tiny, tiny brands that are making things in their lounge room. And that keeps me coming back. That's enough for me to go, well, no, I can get that from somewhere else that, you know, I have a relationship with, and the story matters to me a lot more. And I think if we're able to spread that, gets people excited about it.
You're so right. That storytelling element, I think, is so important. It's not even just the makers, but it's a relationship you have with your own clothes. I think if you even reflect in your own life, some of your favourite outfits or some of your favourite items, they probably have a story behind it. Maybe it's a hand-me-down from a loved one. Maybe you got it while you were travelling. Maybe you've had such fun memories made in these pieces. Like, that's what's so important. And you don't get that when it's like a quick, like, guilty like Shein shop and then you wear it a couple of times and then you don't have that connection. I think, yeah, let's embrace that storytelling and that love of clothes more.
I totally agree with those things too. I wonder if also perhaps we're going to get to a point where the quality of the clothing is so bad that maybe something will snap and people will be like, actually, I can't take this anymore.
If we're not there already, I don't know if we're going to get there.
I mean, how do we educate about quality?
Well, one thing I've been thinking about a lot is how it doesn't have any resale value. So like I sell stuff online secondhand as well, and anything that's like even mildly mass produced, like even like Gorman and stuff like that, which I love, but like you just can't get the money back that you invest. Have you noticed that in your own collections, and like how do you navigate your purchases in that regard?
I used to kind of think in that, you know, what resale value does this thing have as well? But then I also like think about my mum and the fact that she's had clothes since the 80s that I still wear and I still pass on to friends. And I want to be that person who like can still, you know, hold on to those things for sentimental value and they still hold up, that I can pass on. So I'm less concerned with the resale value these days, although I think that's a good part of, you know, pushing for a more sustainable market.
Yeah. Maggie, do you have any?
Yeah, I don't know if I have too much to add there, but you are right. I was just talking to people about this exact thing, about maybe this is how we do engage people to thinking more about their purchases, to think about whether they can essentially get more value money-wise out of it from renting or resale. Yeah, but I'm not too sure kind of where we go from there.
I think a lot of people are thinking about the resale value. I mean, someone who runs a pre-loved market. We've made a shift from the way that we do applications. So we used to just throw the doors open and whoever got in first got a stall, which we ended up getting the same people over and over again, often with low quality pieces that had no resale value, and people were disappointed in the quality of the pieces that they would find at the market. Shifted that to an application process where it's kind of onerous but totally worth it to go through all the applications and see what brands people are coming up with, what notes they're putting against them. Like, if somebody can write me a story about why they love the things that they're selling and want it to go to a loving home, or like want somebody to have the opportunity to wear it again, it's the storytelling thing. Like, I'm so much more engaged with that. But I think, the quality of what's showing up on resale racks in the plus size space is absolutely going up. Like, it's so much better than it was.
It's hard because like those brands, as we've said, like they have the size range, and so people are just needing to access them. But I did read about some ways that governments could assist in terms of like waste, and the Australian Research Centre outlined a fast fashion tax, which I think has been talked about a lot, banning the export of textile waste, and greater support for secondhand things like op shops and recycling initiatives. Have you seen any brands like doing accountability really well, where you've been like, okay, that's amazing and effective?
Yeah, I want to call out Koto, which is a New Zealand label. They take great responsibility, I think, for the clothing that they produce, and they've been around for, it'll be 20 years next year. They have free repairs for all their garments for life. They now have a new resale platform. This is only in New Zealand, but it's coming here, where they will buy back your old pieces from them and then resell it on your behalf. I think that's a great initiative. In a different realm, Rosewell is a Melbourne sex toy company, and the way that they're going about producing new stuff into the world is that they will take any of your old sex toys. I know this is a very different different industry, but they will recycle any other brands because there's no one out there doing that at the moment.
Amazing.
I think having outlets where people, where it's made really easy for people is useful. So things like apparel, who take textile waste and repurpose, bringing that to people, I think, is really important. So that, I mean, again, a non-fashion example, but you ever tried to recycle styrofoam? It is the worst. Like, it hangs around in your house for a really long time, and there's like very, very few places that you can actually recycle it at, and you have to drive for ages to drop it off, and it means that I usually end up throwing the styrofoam into landfill. So if we're able to sort of make the path between needing to dispose of something and disposing of it responsibly as short as possible, then people are far more likely to engage. I think there are some brands doing really nice, responsible sort of tracking of where their stock ends up. So things that are still usable. Made 590, who made this jumpsuit, and Curvature from Adelaide both have thriving Facebook groups where people are, you know, exchanging old pieces that still have plenty of wear in them. And I love that. I mean, you're looking at it and kind of going, well, where's the business case for the people who are making it other than being responsible? But I think there's a lot of brand loyalty that lies in it as well, in making the investment. Sorry, my dad's calling me. In making the investment and understanding why the price tag matters.
I love the little community organising Facebook groups. So good. I wonder if with brands buying back products, though, would that remove that? Is that like, could that present its own problems?
You'd hope that they're not just throwing them into landfill if they can't do anything with them.
Or just making heaps more money off something they've already kind of,
I think it's also a way that encourages you to buy. I think it is a bit of a marketing tactic in that way. But it is, you know, it is like a step forward. I think we need to tackle the waste problem from so many different angles. I think I'm really on board with not exporting textile waste, because what we've learnt is that so much of what we think is getting recycled overseas actually just ends up in landfill, you know, burnt, like on beaches in Ghana. Like, I've seen the images from that. It's really, really depressing. And, you know, a lot of the places that they do send, like the Western world's old clothes to, in the past, that clothing was good enough quality to resell at local markets, but now what they're finding is that, like, it's crappy Temu and it's not worth reselling, so they have to dispose of it. It's just that we don't see it happening. We're just not in touch with what it takes, like what the full life cycle of a piece of clothing is. So far removed.
To your point there as well, in Australia, only 10 to 15% of clothes that are donated to op shops are actually sold here. So like you said, to your point, a lot of that is offshored, and charities actually have to pay out of pocket to have their clothes sent to landfill. As you said, it can disrupt local economies overseas as well. Like, there's so many ongoing things that happen. And what sucks is that, like, most of us are so well-meaning and being like, yes, let's give these clothes a second life and donate them to charity. But it comes back. Even when we're thinking of end of life, it actually comes to the start of the cycle of what we are actually buying and whether that is good enough quality to continue on. And it's unfortunate now that you go to so many op shops and you go through the racks and so many things are not great brands, I would say.
For sure. Well, I'd love to end on a positive note and talk a little bit about what maybe some of your hopes are for the future of the fashion industry and where you're feeling most inspired in terms of brands and advocates or initiatives. Sam, did you want to start?
I'm seeing a lot more brands either extending their size range, or the thing that I really love is free custom sizing. If we don't make it for you already, we will. I think that's the most truly inclusive sort of approach that we can take, and that makes me feel really happy. I think there's also some really great stuff around transparency of the brands that are doing things right, really breaking down how that happens. There's a local brand called Sanct who have done a really fantastic campaign of like, here's a swing tag that shows you all of the costs that are involved in creating the garment that adds up to the RRP and how we got there. And when you sort of understand where that all comes from, you go, oh, absolutely, that's worth it. So I think more transparency makes me feel hopeful.
Amazing.
I think for me, the hope really comes from seeing the new generation of designers coming through. So we're in Melbourne Fashion Festival now, and we've got the National Graduate Showcase on this coming week, and that's always my favourite runway. I think it's always so inspiring and motivating to see new designers in the space, often working with waste and tackling big sustainability questions. For me as well, I think it can be sometimes disenfranchising working in the fashion world, but to me I think a lot of the problems that we're talking about today are about the fashion industry, but fashion can also exist as an art form, as an expression of creativity, as self-expression, and that's what I hold on to, that's what we love, and those two don't have to be one and the same.
I love that.
You're so right. Like the art and the craft side for me is also is a salve against all of the kind of bigger issues we face in the industry. And like I've always thought, you know, I want us to be better at repair. I want us to learn how to mend our clothes, to even make our own clothes. That's an expensive hobby, but you know, if you are into craft, it's really cool. And the other day I thought, like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could bring in our old clothes and bring them to a designer who has all of these creative talents and get them to rework them? Or, you know, maybe they have this like a la carte menu of reworked designs you can choose from. And then I discovered a few like local labels that actually do that. And I was like, this is sick. Like, I'm so excited.
Who are the labels?
I wrote them down because I didn't want to forget. So there's one called Not So New, so as in SEW, and you can bring in like, you know, old collared shirts like something I'm wearing now, and they have like a customization that they'll do with it for you. I think there was a brief experiment, I forget the brand, but you could hand in some old t-shirts and they would kind of screen print over them, like a really cool design. There's an artist called Safael Samad, I think, who has an embroidery machine, and then she has these designs that you can pick from. So you can rock up with your own, you know, cardigan or whatever and get a really cool embroidered thing on it.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's really innovative. I'd love to see more of that. And it's very DIY, which I love.
Yeah, to add to that as well, my little sister did exchange in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and there were so many cool secondhand markets, and there was one where, yeah, you like kind of do, it was a clothes swap, but then there was also DIY stations where like, yeah, she got lace added to her collar, and there were like different gems and things, so it was like so cool, and that's I definitely think we'll be seeing more of that here.
Amazing. Well, thank you for an amazing conversation. We're going to throw to some questions now. We have some mics going around, I believe. Yes, if you want to raise your hand, we can give you a microphone. Not a single question. Oh, we've got a couple. There's one in the front, yeah. Cool.
Hi there. Thank you all. Just in terms of size inclusivity, I know that obviously when we've talked about how we can help, I think the government plays a huge part in this, and in terms of sustainability, we've got, you know, the Seamless Initiative, which the government is trying to push there. But in terms of size inclusivity and also just promoting like standard sizing across different brands, I know that the Australian sizing standards were canned, you know, a few years ago. Do you have any insights as to, you know, how that is moving forward in a more positive and consistent way in terms of like, yeah, developing some kind of consistent standard that brands can then produce from? Like I know there's some great workshops happening for Fashion Week to help brands, you know, size check. You know, what's happening in that realm? Do you have any insights?
In terms of legislation, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anybody else in the panel is. But I think the brands that are catering to larger sizes are understanding the importance of fit checking along the way and having, you know, true size models that represent the bodies that they're dressing instead of just scaling up, because proportions change and, you know, things like this sleeve has elastic around it for a person in a bigger body. Is that going to cut off the circulation in their arm? Do we need to think about changing that elastic, etc.? So I think there's a better understanding of the process of scaling up. But in terms of legislation, I don't know. I would love to see something that incentivises extended size ranges. I think I want to preface this by saying I don't think they do, but if brands do have an argument about larger sizes cost more to make, so we should charge more to make them, or they're too expensive for us to start making, or any of that sort of stuff, I think there's an equal argument in, well, if people have clothes that they feel competent and powerful in, their health outcomes are better. You know, they're better attached to their community, they're better at work, they're taking care of their body because they're not ashamed of it, they're going to see their doctor when there's something wrong, all of that sort of stuff. So I think there would be savings in the health and wellbeing sphere that the government could put towards incentivising people to extend their size ranges.
There's also like a lot of money in the industry. Like I don't know the exact figure, but it's something like 40% of people wear over a size 14.
67.
There you go.
Yep.
So I think that there's like cognitive dissonance there with brands and why they're choosing not to do this.
I think fast fashion also plays such a huge role because just, you know, if you work in fast fashion as a designer, you don't have the time to be doing proper fit checks. You really are like, you know, just grading up the size 8 to a size 20, which doesn't work on a normal person. And so we have to absolutely just remove this, like we have to get out of fast fashion in order to make any kind of meaningful change.
Yeah.
Even to size, yeah.
Anything to say, Maggie? No, cool. I think there was another question just down the front here. Yeah.
Hi. I feel like we've been having this discussion for about 40 years, particularly in relation to size, you know, because I've struggled in the past when I was bigger. But my observation and question is about price. With fast fashion, it is so cheap, and even going to Target or Kmart, and there's a big gap between the really cheap, badly made, and then buying something good. And most of the time you can't afford it, the really good stuff. So I feel guilty buying something on Temu, but I need that bolero jacket in that particular colour that I cannot find anywhere else. So I've found this with other stuff too, having recently moved home, that there's a big gap between buying something really cheap in Kmart and then the next level is 5 times more expensive. And I don't know what the answer is. I wonder if that's something that's been discussed.
It's a hard one, isn't it? And I don't think there's any perfect answer to it. For me, and this isn't the case for every situation, but I always try to bring in more patience in terms of getting something, because one of the solutions, which is by far from perfect, is secondhand, right? But for people who are time poor, who are plus size, that makes it harder. There are more barriers there. But I sometimes will really want an item, and maybe there's something similar at a fast fashion shop, but I'm going to wait a few months and try find it a different way. But that's the thing. It's like there's a lot of patience involved in it, and not letting yourself have that instant gratification. And sometimes you can't. Maybe there's an event coming up, or there's something you really need it for. So that's not in all ways the same, but pricing is a hard one.
It does, I agree with you, it does feel like there's that missing middle where you either go from super cheap to super expensive. And I think, you know, fashion that is more responsibly made is going to cost more, and we have gotten used to paying very, very little for our clothing. But yes, like Maggie said, I think that's why secondhand fashion has become a much bigger category for people, because it is more affordable. But I get all of the downsides. It takes more time, more patience. I don't have the answer, really.
I guess we're all just buying the best we can for the price point that we're at, right? Like, I mean, we're not, because fast fashion. But if possible, I guess that's what we're doing. I think what I'm trying to say is don't beat yourself up if the thing that you wish exists doesn't exist, because while plus size people aren't immune from the discussion around sustainability, I think the terms are a bit different.
Any more questions?
I think it's been mentioned a few times that Australians are like the biggest consumers of textiles in the world. And I think it's interesting because we're also like known to be kind of like a casual culture. I was just wondering if you guys think that there's anything, like what's going on within our culture that is making it that this is sort of a place where people are essentially like spending it almost like addictive levels. I hope that makes sense.
I think it's just normalised that people expect to have new things all the time or expect to be seen in new things all the time, so that there's a lot of cultural capital that's tied to either following a trend or having a new shiny thing. And I think it's really hard to divest from that, but also really important.
That's such a great question, by the way. I really like the link you've made. I do also think with the internet and social media, we're becoming so much more globalized as well, and we really do follow in like America's footsteps, for better or for worse. And I think there's that blurring of the boundaries of what our casual culture typically is, to also wanting to be in the now and in like what's trendy.
I'm just really curious about the stats. So was that I know that Australians like consume, I forgot how much you said, we do consume a lot of and waste a lot of textiles, but do we beat America?
Yeah, I know.
Embarrassing.
Per capita.
So embarrassing. I do wonder, do we have more disposable income? I don't know.
That's a good, that could be.
Perhaps.
Or is it per capita?
This is done per capita.
Yeah.
It's by the Australian Institute if people want to look into it more. But the results are, it's shocking.
That thing about social media as well, it's like everything's faster. It's like the churn and burn is not just like buying. It's like our whole lives are like, okay, next thing. So we have like no contemplation for like what we have or what's meaningful as much or less than we did in previous eras, I think.
Yeah, so back in the day when Zara was kind of one of the first big fast fashion players, like in the 80s, it was revolutionary that they could take a design to something that was on the storefront in 2 weeks. Now with Shein and Temu, that happens in a few days. And we see that from trends that emerge online and then how quickly they're translated to people's wardrobe. So you're so right, like the speed is kind of really hard to wrap your head around.
Hi, this is probably a whole other talk in itself, so feel free to keep it brief. I'm in the jewellery realm, so I consider that a part of fashion, and I'd love to know what you guys think of everything you've kind of just discussed and all the points and how it applies to jewellery, because I see from what I do that it does directly apply to jewellery, and we're probably getting closer to having fast jewellery as well now too. So I'd be really keen to know what you guys think.
I'm actually really excited about jewellery at the moment. I think it's a great, like jewellery and accessorising is a really great way of re-wearing the pieces that you already own, repurposing them, making them into something new. So I think that jewellery potentially has a really big part to play in people rethinking the things, shopping their own wardrobe.
I think one of the most powerful things about jewellery is how personal it is. And, I'm looking at the rings I wear and I wear them like every day and I know where I got them and I know why I got them. So I think that's one benefit that jewellery does have over fashion. I think most of us have a few core pieces. I mean, speaking for myself, I definitely have fewer jewellery pieces than fashion pieces. But you're right, this fastness goes through different industries. There's been a conversation around fast homewares in recent years and seeing trends kind of come about that way. So you're in the industry, so you're seeing it a lot more than us, but it's something I think to keep an eye on.
have nothing to add. I don't know about jewelry. I made this necklace because I
you made it.
too
amazing.
cheap to buy jewelry.
That's cool. I don't know much about jewelry, but I am wearing some loaned pieces from a local designer, and I think I'm just like so astonished by the amazing things that people are creating in Melbourne, like by hand, and you can just tell how personal the artist has, like, it's very personal to the artist. So I think that's a positive that we have that industry here, especially. Yeah. There's another question just in the middle here.
I thank you firstly for your talk today. It's been so interesting. I'm just really surprised whenever I go to buy anything from a sale from a retailer, there are always only smaller sizes left. And I just wonder, what is it with retailers that if all of the larger sizes have gone, does that mean that they're more popular and they should probably make some money by stocking more, or that they didn't have enough there to start with? Do you have any insight onto why that happens? Because every time there's a sale, there's no large sizes left.
They stock less.
What a waste, what a missed opportunity for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the demand is there, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's so silly.
It's weird.
Amazing. Well, thank you for those amazing... Oh, one more? Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No.
Just
Go
a
for it.
question about, you talked about some of the brands that are sort of that mid-range price point that are better quality than the really cheap options. The thing that I struggle with is finding those brands and hearing about them, because if I'm on my phone on social media, I just get ads for Temu over and over again, and I look for things that are responsibly made or something like that, and it's rare that I find something that is actually in Melbourne. I can find things in other parts of Australia, but is there somewhere to go where we can find out what things are in that better quality brands and that are in our local area? I don't know where we find that information, if there is somewhere to get it.
I actually was going to say this before, because when we were talking about secondhand clothing, because there are a lot of Facebook groups that we all just like kind of know about, or there's probably versions of them in every community, but a lot of people don't access those platforms. So yeah, what do you think is the answer to that?
Two things. I can't tell from here if you're plus size or not, but one, come to A+. Two, I think changing your media landscape can be really powerful. So I think snapping your algorithm back to something slower is really hard work. But if you can sort of do a bit more mindful digging of the people that I'm mentioning, those mid-point things, I think if you follow anyone on this panel, that's probably a good place to start. And just really engaging with those things, liking them, sharing them, commenting on them, that will help snap your algorithm back to the things that you actually want to see, and that might be a bit helpful.
And another piece of advice I'd give is Fashion Journal, which is a local publication here. They do a lot of good directories that are quite specific. So it might be Australian brands that cater to plus sizes, Australian brands who do made to order. They've got quite a few specific things, and that's always a nice place, I think, to look for smaller independent brands and then kind of go on your own search from there.
It definitely requires research,
Yeah.
but I'm going to sound really basic here. Reddit is really good.
I love Reddit.
Reddit is great for there's a community, I think it's called like Australian Women's Fashion or something, and there are all different types of discussions about mid-price brands, ethical brands, locally made, ones that have extended size ranges. I also just created a list on my phone last night, depending on your style. I would be happy to share that with you if you are interested in those kinds of labels. But yeah, I guess there's no one like directory that you can just go to.
Speaking of directories, though, I would like to shout out to Jiggle Club, which is a newish, started out as a spreadsheet that lists loads of brands and services that you can tap into that do, cater to different sizes, different price points. So have a look at them. They might have something useful for you.
We have time for one more question if there is one. Just at the back. Yeah.
I was wondering, given the rise of kind of duping culture, how can small sustainable brands protect their designs and really market that they are being different than fast fashion brands that are duping them?
Oh, this is such a big one, hey. I think there's been a few stories coming out in the last couple of months with brands. And the sad thing is it's really hard to kind of protect your designs here in Australia. The copyright laws are quite open. Okay, I have no law experience, so don't quote me on this. I did a piece, I wrote an article about this though. I think the point of difference that people really do connect with smaller sustainable brands is that storytelling. It's that story. It's also about like manufacturing and your materials and staying true to that. That's what can't be duplicated, right? We kind of know the soullessness that is taken sometimes from this duping behavior. So staying true to who you are, honestly, I think is what's strong there.
It sucks to have your design stolen. It hurts. And, you know, protecting yourself legally can be really, really expensive. Designers that I know this has happened to, they just don't bother at this point, but you have to remember that your creativity is yours. And if you made that beautiful thing the first time that got duped, trust yourself that you can make something else that's original. No one can take that creativity away from you.
I feel the same about art. I feel like people have their art ripped off all the time, and I'm always like, but they're not. You know the difference between what's the one and what's not. Well, can we get a round of applause for our wonderful panellists, please?